We have Heiko Rupp, right?
Yes.
All right. Tell us about middleware. Go for it.
Yeah, so my name is Heiko. Thanks for introducing me. I work in Red Hat since 2006, always on management of the middleware side. And now we have been starting contributing into ManageIQ as well. And I'm going to talk about what we're doing here. And what is interesting is, so you have this ManageIQ installation all set up, everything beautiful. And what you're monitoring actually is servers, networks, storage, or managing mostly, probably even, containers. And everything what you do is infrastructure. But in reality, I mean, infrastructure is cool, and everyone likes the next new server, the next new laptop, and everything, those things. But usually, you don't run them just because you want to consume energy. You run them because you want to do something with them. And what you want to do is you want to run applications like these. You want to run backends for online navigation, for online services. You want to crunch your business data on them, right? You want to do run an online shop. and all you do with these things, with these applications, they create your money that you can then spend on your hardware. And you run them, basically, many of them on the Red Hat JBoss middleware. And these are a few logos of some middleware projects. So the Wildfly up here, that's the upstream for the Red Hat Enterprise Application Server. AeroGear feeds into the mobile platform. Then there is BlackTie, I think, is a connector to the COBOL world and in the mainframe even. Whatever. Netty is an asynchronous framework like Vertex, Event Bus. InfiniSpan, a highly distributed memory grid, memory cache, so memcache, distributed memcache on steroids, right? And you run all that. It's all Java middleware. Of course, there are other middleware, be it from other vendors. And I guess if you look at it, Ruby on Rails is sort of a middleware as well. But we are concentrating right now on the JBoss middleware side, or I'm doing that at least. And this leads me to introduce the Hawkelar middleware provider within ManageIQ. Hawkelar is a project with components for monitoring and management of middleware. It's under ASL version 2, so highly compatible with ManageIQ, of course. Website is hawkelar.org. It's written in Java, runs on JDK 8, and to access it, we have everything available as REST API. We used to have our own UI, which we have now trimmed down, slimmed down, call it as you wish, and this UI was accessing everything over this very same REST UI. And now we have created a client gem for Ruby that's, again, using this REST API. So this is the way on talking to Hawkelar. And here on the right side, you see a few of these components that we have. So there is a basic infrastructure, a messaging infrastructure, and where the components live inside. Then we have an inventory component, which is a graph database where you register your managed stuff in a way that makes sense for you. You can use it just as a tree in a classical way, but you can also have relations between entities in the database. And I'll come to that later again. Then we have alerting subsystem where we can feed in metrics that we collect, other things that we collect, compare against thresholds and other rules, and then emit alerts or events. And these events we can actually, again, feed into the ManageIQ event subsystem. And then we have an agent. I'll talk about this in a moment as well. And this component is marked in green on purpose because this is the Hawkelar metrics that we have been talking about this morning already in the container management side, where the container management guys pull their metrics out of from OpenShift and visualize the data. And there are other projects considering looking into this as well as their time series database. We will actually have a talk on it in the internal section. And now what we have in Hawkilla is, well, in ManageIQ, we have a new middleware tab here in the top level menu section. This is everything now in ManageIQ Master. It's not in Darga. Technically, there is some stuff in Darga, but it's hidden, so it's ManageIQ Master. And before I continue with that, I want to first talk about what is middleware actually. Because I know that in Ruby and some other languages, there's also a notion of middleware, but which is more like a sort of what we in the Java world call interceptor. Like you do something and then pass your request to the next middleware thingy, and this is not what we mean here. But here, the middleware, this one, is basically a bunch of services like an application server like Rails. It abstracts from the underlying operating system hardware. It offers services like connectors for HTTP, for REST injection or ingestion. It will provide you connectors to back-end databases, back-end ERP systems, all these things, to cloud systems, private, public cloud, doesn't matter. And on it, you run your applications that consume all these services, right? So the prime example here is the Wildfly application server, where it's a Java EE certified application server. So you run, can you run your enterprise application? You package that in a certain format as a web archive or enterprise archive, which is a zip file, basically, and then the application server gives you the database connection. It gives you database pooling, connection pooling. So you just say, okay, I want to talk to a database with the name foo, and the application server then has a definition where foo is. And when you need a new connection, the server will take it from the pool and hand it to you, or if there are no more connections in the pool, you will open the new one to the back end. And all these services, and it's a standardized programming API as well. So when you have all these standardized EE APIs that you can talk against. Okay, so now let me talk about the architectural overview of the Hawkilla and Hawkilla with ManageIQ setup. So the central piece is the Hawkilla server, basically what we have seen before in the dashed line box thingy. This has a Cassandra data store as the backend, mostly for metrics, but we also store other things like the inventory information, alerting setup, and so on in this Cassandra. Cassandra is highly scalable, so if it's not fast enough or if space is not enough, you just add another Cassandra node, and it will distribute the load if you add a third one, and then you can say, okay, my data should always be replicated to at least 2 of the 3 nodes. So if one of the 3 crashes, the data is still available, and Cassandra will do everything for you. So this is the central part of the server side. And then we have, for these middleware products here, or projects, we have agents for Wildfly and InfiniSpan, basically everything that's based on Wildfly itself. We have an embedded agent that lives as a subsystem within the middleware. So it may or may not be distributed by default by Wildfly, but it's easy to edit. So either you can do it manually, we have an installer, or I've also created Ansible playbooks in the past to just instrument the middleware with the agent. And this agent will then talk to the Hawkilla server. And in cases where you can't embed it, you can also just run the agent standalone in a different setup and then have it talking to other middleware. So this could be Java, but it could also be something else. I'll come to that in a minute. And then the other part is, of course, here we have ManageIQ, we have the Hawkilla client gem, and this Hawkilla client gem is then talking to the Hawkilla server, pulling out the data and doing the inventory refresh, pulling stuff into the ManageIQ inventory, and so on. So this is the whole picture again. And actually, and this, I just mentioned it briefly, here you can have whatever agent you want. Our system is pretty generic from its setup. So I know that, for example, the storage group, they want to also integrate with ManageIQ. And if they don't want to do the hassle of writing everything here, they could also just write an agent that talks to Ceph and Cluster and these things, pulls out the metric and the inventory information, and feeds it into Hocular. And then ManageIQ can basically use all the infrastructure that we already have here, created here, and to pull with this Ruby gem it into the central ManageIQ system. So technically there are no limits of doing this. If they want that, it's a different discussion, but we at least have it, and we offer to use it and reuse it here. So now, when you look at this, this is now where it actually starts getting interesting. I mean, so far, the provider is pretty standard. That's what everyone does, I guess. But if you look at it in more detail, you will probably see that all these middleware products that run on containers, hosts, virtual hosts, be it bare metal, whatever. So for me, it's all operating system, right? And all these operating systems have providers in ManageIQ. So they are all already managed within ManageIQ. So this is where the circle closes. And now we don't only have infrastructure, but we have both infrastructure and applications, right? So this is where we stand right now. For the ManageIQ provider integration, you can add this provider or multiple middleware providers. You can pull in all the Wildfly application servers, list them in various ways. You can pull in the deployments, so the application archives, get them listed for each of the servers. We have the data sources right now in master, so you can see the data sources and on which server they live. We have the topology screen that you already have seen. We have some charting. I'll come to that in a moment. We also have already some eventing, so when you deploy a new application archive into a Wildfly, you will get an event that is then shown in the event timeline, or which could be used for automate purposes. And now I have a few screenshots. So middleware provider screen, summary page for one of the providers. Here you see servers, deployment, data sources, link to topology. Pretty standard, so just for completeness sake. Here, the middleware servers, and actually what you see here, if you look close enough and have your Googles with you, there is the Hocular symbol showing twice. So the Hocular server itself is also running, or a kind of a Wildfly server, so the Hocular itself is running on Wildfly, and here it is just monitoring itself. We have done that in the past already, and this is pretty useful actually to figure out if your provider is performing well, or if your monitoring system is performing well, right? And then we have here the Wildfly server icon, and then one that's made up for EAP. That's something we still need to discuss with Brand, because just showing Shadowman for everything that's coming from Red Hat is probably not a very good way of distinguish things. So I like it to be more graphical. And then we have the topology. And Fede this morning said, yeah, they created that with the help from staff. And actually, we not only took it from containers, but we also took the developer who did that. So Alyssa now works for us, not only on topology, but on all these things. That's pretty exciting. And then we have the charting. I mentioned that. And why I'm bringing it up here on purpose, again, is we have gone a little bit of a different way with the charting than most of the providers. In ManageIQ, the charting and the reports come out from the Postgres database, from a special set of tables. and the columns in the tables are extremely tailored to what VMware had 6 years ago or 10 years ago. And this just does not fit well what we have. And then there were other things that we will discuss, I think, tomorrow or the day after. Anyway, so Lucas, sitting here, went and created something which we call now live metrics. So these charts, these are the standard ManageIQ charts in the front end, charting code, but this is not fed by active record going to Postgres, but in fact it's going out to the provider and fetching the data live from the metrics database of the provider. So this is pretty cool, and we'll talk about this more later. Okay, so near term for us, this is the E release in December, I guess. Yeah, something like this. So in the next release, the E release, we will try to fully support EAP7/Wildfire servers in standalone and domain mode. So standalone mode is you have one server that is basically just working on its own with all these applications. And then they have another thing which is called domain. So you have a master controller, and this one, and then on many hosts, they have slave controllers or host controllers and domain controllers, and then you have any number of managed servers on these distributed hosts. So we will try to manage and monitor both of them, have the full lifecycle operations. So not only the lifecycle of the server itself, like starting and stopping the server, but also with the deployments, deploying, undeploying. With the embedded agent, it's of course very easy to stop a server, but restarting it when the process is not running through that agent that it's inside is a bit trickier, so we're going to do that a little bit differently. But this is certainly coming. And then alerting. So if a metric is above a certain threshold, that you can get alert, or alerts from failed deployments and these things. I already mentioned that we are already feeding into the ManageIQ event system for this purpose. And again, Lucas is working on our alert component that you can, in ManageIQ, define the thresholds. This is then pushed behind the scenes into Hawkella Provider. And Hawkella Provider is now running all the comparison jobs for each metric that is incoming. And if the metric is out of whack, it will create an event which is fed into ManageIQ and then can create an email alert or an automate action, whatever you want from that. And then the other thing which we are starting, may not be complete, is cross-linking to the underlying operating system. And this is, again, so this is what we want to do for the E-release, and then you have it in your summary screen, and you see probably it's running on my RHEL 7 yada yada box. But yes. And now I think this is now with the future where the fun starts. So up until then, it's pretty basic stuff that we have to do and so on. But this is where there's the fun stuff. And we have an application. So this is this brand application icon. And if you look at the application, what an application actually means, like an e-shop, an online shop, or a backend for mapping or whatever, is you have many components, right? You have a load balancer in front of it. You may have 3 application servers and a backend database. It's very easy. I make that up. So what we could have, or what I see that we should do, I mean, this is not, this is my vision, not from product management. What we should do is now have an application screen where you list all the applications. And here you see that also the health state. Like 2 are green, so they are in good shape. 1 is in a warning level, and another one is an error level, like the application 4. And then you click on the application 4, and you get a drill in. And you see a picture like this one. So perhaps a little bit like the topology view that we have today, right? And you see the load balancer is good. This one is good, but 2 of my application servers are out of whack, and this is why the overall application is out of whack. If 2 would be green and the third one would be red, the overall state could be yellow, for example, right? And then you click on one of or both of these application servers that are in bad shape, and you get a drill in. Then with the cross-linking, you will see, okay, they run on 2 virtual machines that by themselves, interestingly, are green because the operating stats, everything is looking good, but still the application servers may be red because this is just maybe a very different metric like latency of requests, right? So your machines here, they may not be used as much because actually the underlying host, the bare metal has an issue, like this other virtual machine just feeding in or using so much CPU or network or whatever that the others just can't get it, can't run. So all the figures here are low, but your application is suffering. And then a further drill in or out, depending on how you see that, you will find out that this application is running wild, creating so much load that your eShop is not running correctly. And so the vision is really using the whole information that we have in the overall ManageIQ system now to figure out why is my application not performing, why am I not making money with my online shop, right? I mean, this is where the meat is, why we do all this exercise. If you look at it, this example, if you revisit it from a little bit of a different angle, in Horkula, or also what we did before, our worldview is, of course, the application server and the application, and we know that domain. We can get all numbers, all figures from that, and everything. But here is where we end. We see the underlying operating system. Perhaps we figure out if it's a container or a virtual machine or bare metal, but probably not. We don't get at this data, right? We just see, okay, this can't be the issue because it's green. All the CPU data that we get, our application server gets no CPU data, so it's not a suspect. The current ManageIQ infrastructure view sees, okay, I have 2 green servers, and this also looks good. And now, combining Horkula and ManageIQ, we now have the full world view. The circle closes, and we can really make sense of the collected data. Okay, so far I've been talking about this application and the setup, and we have bypassing, going through the scriptors and so on. We certainly have a way of gathering a lot of this data, how an application is comprised. But sometimes it may be needed to manually add it here. And what we have been thinking is to use actually topology screen for this, right? So you have probably your application symbol or something like this, and then you will be able to just draw links to entries in the topology view and say, okay, these 2 are related, right? They are part of my application. So my application uses this web archive and this web archive over there on the other server on this other provider. So just really coming out of the topology view. Similar for lifecycle operations, we're thinking of adding context menus on the topology items here to directly be able to start or stop a server or reload it and do these things, and not having to go through menus and whatnot to first find the server and then doing this. Okay, so the previous look at things, at the application and everything was still very much, let me say, infrastructure tailored, even if I'm talking about application, but it was really still a very, an infrastructure bottom-up view. But actually, you can also have a different look at your application again. So if you have a closer look, you see that an application very often provides services. So if you have an online booking system, you may have a service, flight reservation, flight lookup, so you can see what you just booked. And the flight reservation will then call into other services, microservices, which may call cloud services, yet another things, right? And what we have in the Hawkela application performance management space, Hawkela APM, which is using Hawkela components, but is not in this dashed line box that I've been showing before, is that we can instrument, again, the application servers with the agent. And with the agent, we are able to trace invocations and to figure out who is calling who. So we can identify all these services. We can, so the idea is to present them on a screen, all the services that we have found. And then you can take 2 of them, mark them, and say, okay, this is my application that I want to know about, right? And then you have, again, your applications screen. The application 4 was out of whack, so you go into it, see, okay, one of my 2 services of my application 4 is unhealthy. Again, you drill in, and here you see from the distributed tracing, you see the call chain. Like this one is first going to this service and then to the airline. This is good. But here the payment service has problems. Apparently the credit card company responds promptly. But here my database with the payment records does not respond, whatever. You drill in again, so double click on the database. And then you see, okay, this is on this machine. And again, some other service is creating load like an ETL or dump that's currently running or running wild. And so you can figure out why your service is not performing, and again, why you are not making money with your service and your infrastructure that you have deployed. So the DLDL is, there are some awesome times ahead. We need to get to them, but I think this is pretty awesome for both sides of the house, so for middleware with Hawkela and also the ManageIQ side, and that's it. Thank you. Questions? No questions? Okay. Yes?
What's the relationship between this and the service designer capability in terms of being able to include middleware services that are natively developed in cloud forms?
It's funny, we just talked before lunch about that. So it's not yet, I mean, this is when I was talking future, right? This is also about the long-term vision. And the service designer and the instrumentation of middleware and so on is certainly part of this. There are different ways on, let's say, deploying this. And in the classical way, you install your middleware server by some provision it, right? So the service designer would already come in here, like you say, okay, I have a bare metal host, I put some VM on it, and then with the service designer, I put an application server on it, and then I somehow get my application archive, so my real application, I pull it into the service designer and say, okay, now go with it. That's one way. Then in a containerized environment, you probably don't want this, so more go like with the immutable containers, so you don't deploy just an OS container or a container with OS plus application server and then manually deploy the application on top of, but you would rather assemble them first and then just have this as a service that you pull into your Kubernetes OpenShift and say, okay, this is my service that's running. So here it's more about, in this case, I think the service designer, I mean, I'm not an expert in that, right? So may be less important, but it's more important to figure out the relations between the various parts and help the system figure out these relations between the various parts. So in these applications or in the application server, as I mentioned, we have this descriptor, so we know where basically we can parse that and can say, okay, this is where the backend database is. So we can identify it by some name and have it automatically included. But sometimes this may or may not work. We may not be able to figure it out. For example, with a load balancer, if you have a hardware load balancer, the application server may not know it, where it is. It's rather the load balancer that may know it. I have to go to all these, right? So either we add something that the load balancer can create the linkage, or if it can't, that we manually add it. And here the service designer could be another opportunity to do that. And when I was showing this picture with load balancer, application servers, database, I mean, this could, again, for the service, be a part for the service designer that you really orchestrate and define how your overall application is going to look. And you put, for example, on the EAP, on the application server side, you can say, okay, this is one that I also want to spin up and down depending on load or depending on other formula that you send up, right? I mean, it's an automate job, perhaps a more educated automate job, because we have so many metrics that we are collecting, not only from the infrastructure, but also from the application itself. It very often also depends on the time of day. So with my 3 application servers that are load balanced and doing the failover, if it's in the middle of the night and it's an internal application, you probably want to have a different rule than when it's during high business hours, right? Or in this, what if it's called Good Friday, before when the Christmas shopping starts, right? You probably even want to spin up 3 more instances a day before and then turn them down 5 days later when business gets back to normal. But this is more medium to long-term vision right now. Again, we have to get the basics out for probably December, and then we can really start looking into these more forward-looking things. Yes?
It's not clear to me from your presentation how, it's not, I don't think I need it actually, but it's not clear to me from your presentation from ManageIQ, do you just configure the Hawkular server and all of the Hawkular agents are actually configured on the Hawkular server? Or can you configure using the ManageIQ UI through the Hawkular server to add other Hawkular agents?
The idea is to either, well, from the ManageIQ UI, either to provision EAPs with the agent already installed, or to instrument them. So if you already have an infrastructure running where it's not yet instrumented, you can, we will have ways to still identify these running EAPs, and then you will have a way from the ManageIQ UI to say, okay, instrument that, because I want to take it into my inventory and make further sense out of it.
So in that case, what is the Hawkular server doing? I thought the Hawkular server was controlling and
Yes.
gathering the data from those agents and reporting it to ManageIQ.
Yeah, I mean, the ManageIQ UI will talk to the Hawkular server.
To gather data.
Yeah, not
But
only
configuration can be done the other way too?
How do you mean?
The UI, the ManageIQ talks to the Hawkular server to gather
Yes.
data that's been configured.
Yes.
And it can also configure Hawkular agents?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. I mean, if the agent is already there, it will be able to configure things like collection interval. How often do you want to take a metric? So you can also have, if it's something very important, that you really take it every 10 seconds, and then our alerting will just say, okay, this is above a threshold, so we forward the information into ManageIQ for eventing automation, or otherwise we dump it or just store it, right? But to get the agent into the system, this is definitely triggered from the ManageIQ, from the provisioning side. I think one thing which is a bit different from the Hawkular use case than from, let's say, the classical VMware or whatever use case is we do not have our own UI. So you don't go to the Hawkular UI to do all these things because it's headless, right? So you have to do it through ManageIQ.
So we can really manage anything as long as it implements an agent to talk to that anything.
Yes. This is what I actually want to hint before with the storage, because I know that the storage guys also want to come to Hawkula, not to ManageIQ, excuse me, that they could use this Hawkula infrastructure by just writing a different agent, or that talks to their services, and then uses from there on all these mechanisms that we have already built in with our inventory, which can know about relation between services, like my 3 application servers, right? That they form a cluster. All these things, and we have the client gem to pull the information into ManageIQ. This can be all reused. The only thing that they would have to do is write an agent to pull out the information and feed it into Hawkula.
So yesterday in Oleg's keynote at the end, he said the ultimate goal of ManageIQ is to manage all things. So we're done. We can all go home.
Yeah.
Good job. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes?
What you're describing with storage sounds similar to what they've done with OpenShift, how they're leveraging Hawkula to do metrics. I realize there are a lot of other components, but is that, am I on board with that?
So OpenShift is using the Hawkula metrics component, so not the full suite right now with inventory and alerting. They are considering to also use alerting, but yes, of course. And here they have the Heapster as the sink to provide the data, which is just yet another version of an agent. So that you mention it. And then they have, I think, some charting directly pulling it from the Hawkula metrics for the developer console. And then the cloud management team that Federico, what he presented this morning, is then also using this data and pulling it into ManageIQ itself for the administrator dashboard. And yes. So yes, it's similar. I mean, it's how shall I say that? It's not like we have invented something completely new here. There are similar ways of doing these things. But yes. Any more questions? I mean, I'm still around. I'm on Gitter and IRC and Twitter and so on. So just ping me. Thank you.